Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. And thank you for everybody who's come along this evening. Obviously, it's nice to have an audience when you put something like this on. Um, I'm before I launch into this talk, there's a couple of questions I'd like to ask from everybody. And if you are familiar with Zoom, rather than everyone sort of shouting out, it's kind of relatively straightforward sort of yes no answers. So if you can use there's a sort of a reaction tab at the bottom of the screen. If you bring your mouse to the bottom, you can see a react, and there's a little kind of heart emblem. So if you, I'd love to know if you have been to the Wyre Forest before, and if you have, send me a heart, and if you haven't, uh, send me maybe a crying sign, a little crying emoji, so I can get a sense of. I'd be really interested to get a sense of who's there. Right. So
Oh,
it doesn't. Oh, blimey! Does that mean everybody has been?
no,
Oh no,
no, no.
Neve hasn't. And
Gray hasn't,
okay, okay,
and Matthew,
right,
uh,
okay. So we've got a few people who are unfamiliar with that.
three weepers.
Okay. Um, and I'm guessing everybody is everybody here a companion? I know Neve isn't. Is there, if there's anyone else who isn't a companion, can you give me a little crying sign as
Everyone
well?
else is a
Everyone
companion.
else is a companion. Okay, so Neve is the only companion. The reason I wanted to ask those questions, I suppose, is I wanted to get a sense before I launch into this, a bit of a sense of what to include, so I can tailor this a little bit. And I suppose the last question is: whilst you may have been to the Wyre Forest, is there anyone here who is um, familiar with sort of nature conservation and management of woodlands? And if you can give me a little heart if you are, and a little crying emoji if you aren't, because again, it would just help me get a sense of where your starting point is. And we've got a few crying emojis. I'm not getting much on the screen actually here.
Uh,
So if you have any experience or knowledge of woodland management or other such things, a little heart emoji would be great.
you,
Crying emoji would be great if you haven't.
yeah,
And I think that's all.
you've got a heart from Chris Baines. You've had a heart from Richard and Kelly Channing.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and a lovely message from Matthew saying, I wish I could give a heart in answer to that
Okay.
question. Maybe you'll feel you can afterwards, Matthew.
Okay. Um, and I'm going to give you a sort of a crying emoji from my side, which is whilst I have a lot of knowledge about nature conservation, woodland management through a career working in this sort of world, um, I'm not a Ruskin scholar. I've read a bit and I'm learning all the time. And one of the lovely things about being a companion is that it's such a diverse and interesting mix of people with all sorts of different backgrounds, and we're all learning from each other all the time. And I suppose today is a little bit of my sharing of my knowledge of the woodland and of nature conservation and how I've learned about Ruskin and what it brings and makes Ruskin Land really unique. And so, without any more questions, I'm going to share my screen and start the show. And share. Simon, can you just confirm you've got my first slide up?
Not, yes, it is now up.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so just a very brief introduction to myself. If you don't know me, I'm Mark Cleaver. I'm one of the directors for the Guild. I can't remember when I became a companion, but it was probably around 2011, 10 maybe. And I was the farm manager for the Wyre Community Land Trust, who you can see in this sign here, who work in partnership with the Guild in managing this lovely piece of land, and I have a background in nature conservation. And I took over being a director when John Isles retired from the board about 5 years ago. So it's been a lovely return to the Wyre Forest. I want to talk about the influence of Ruskin on this lovely piece of land and why it makes it very different from the rest of the Wyre Forest. And I also kind of share, I suppose, a little bit about what I've learned from reading more recently and how I think there's some real synergies which may not have been explored before. So I'm going to flip through some of these slides fairly quickly because some of you know. I met, and it's probably also worth me mentioning that I met Neve yesterday at Birmingham University at an event there, and she's the only non-companion on this talk, and I've sort of explained all about her. So in case this slide was really in case anybody was unfamiliar, so I won't go over that again because I think everybody's fairly familiar with a little bit about the guild. Very briefly, for those who haven't been there, or perhaps don't know much about it, the land originally, or a small piece of land, was given by this chap here, George Baker, who was the mayor of London. He was a local sort of entrepreneur and wealthy sort of chap, and he gave some land. He gave a piece of the Wyre Forest to Ruskin. As an opportunity to, I suppose, experiment and explore what could be done, given Ruskin's sort of ideas about the rural economy and craft. And there's just a couple of historic pictures to give you a bit of a sense of what it was perhaps like in the distant past. And I'm not even sure. These pictures came from John Isles, so we can thank him for those. Ruskin wasn't sure what to do with the Wyre Forest when he first had this land, and there was an idea that perhaps an art museum could be built there, but that didn't come to pass. But in fact, some of Cedric's, who's on the line here, some of Cedric's relatives and others came down from Liverpool and started to farm and tend the land. And that's how it came to pass, and that was in sort of around the 1870s. So that gives you a kind of sense of where it all started. But the forest goes back much further back than that. To give, I'm not sure. One of the questions I didn't ask was if everybody knew where it is. So I'm going to give, I should have done this first. So I'm going to give you a chance for those people who are perhaps not familiar with where we are, an opportunity for a little bit of high-tech wizardry. And so you can see that, if it's going, oh, hello, it's not going to work. This is where I embarrass myself. Here we go. Try that. So the Wyre Forest is in the West Midlands. And if it's going to play ball, you're going to... I sometimes wonder if these things are gimmicks more than anything else, or whether they're really helpful. So you can give some feedback on that. So the West Midlands, fairly central England, and there's this large piece of woodland you can see here, and in the south, sort of eastern quadrant, you can see there's two sort of clearings. That's Unclis Farm to the bottom of the picture and St George's Farm to the top of the picture. And old-fashioned ways, here we are, a little map of England on the top right, little red circle, which is Birmingham, and then that large sort of green, sort of funny shaped green is the Wyre Forest in its totality, and then you can see that sort of orange or red oval is approximately where Ruskin Land is. And you can see this image is the Wyre Forest National Nature Reserve, which is the largest woodland national nature reserve in England. It's around 1,500 hectares in total. And Ruskin Land it's all site of special scientific interest, as is most of Ruskin Land. And Ruskin Land is only not within the National Nature Reserve because it's not owned and managed by an appropriate body. So, it is, to all intents and purposes, part of the same whole. And this, to a large extent, is what's actually there. So I think it's probably quite useful, actually, to get a reaction on people's thoughts about this picture, whether they think it's attractive, whether they think it's a positive image of a woodland, whether it's it looks like a nice woodland. And it doesn't matter what standpoint you're coming from, whether you're coming from an ecology perspective or a recreational perspective or an aesthetic perspective. I'd just be interested just to get your kind of initial reaction to this photograph. So a heart emoji if you like it, a crying emoji if you don't, and maybe a wave if you are not sure. I'm not sure, Simon, I'm not getting much here. Oh, there's a chat.
They're going up over the screen, Mark, but you may not be seeing that for some reason because so they're all floating up on the left-hand side of the screen when people.
Okay. Right, lovely. Okay, I might have to ask you for feedback on that, Simon.
Yeah,
if that's
okay. You're getting a mixture of thumbs up,
okay.
Ambivalence, and hearts.
Well, the Wyre Forest is an interesting place in that it's a very, as you can see here, most of the trees are the same size, the same age, the same species, and there's very little between the bottom and the top, which means it's not very diverse. And everybody should know that diversity is king. We all talk about biodiversity, and biodiversity is about the range of different species. It's also about structure. So that could be things of different heights, different sizes, different ages. It could be of space. So what we call a mosaic. So some areas of closed woodland, some areas of open woodland, and so on and so forth. And in the past, it was a very even standard woodland, and it's changed very much. So this is what you would have seen maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, when John Isles took on the management of the forest back from Natural England, who the woodland had been leased to for a long time, and much funding has poured into the forest since that time. The other thing that's very characteristic of the Wyre Forest is traditional orchards. I think this one might actually be Cedric's, this picture, but I can't remember for sure. And you can see a lot of the orchards were tumbling down. Many were being grazed for horse pasture, and they were being chopped up for firewood, which is a very convenient use of old dead trees. Now, another quick emoji on this one. Same again, good, bad, or indifferent, or not sure. So hearts for good, crying for bad, and waves for not sure, or wave for not sure.
You're getting hearts and applauding hands.
Okay. Lots of lovely deadwood, open areas, new tree planting. So we've got different ages. It's somewhere in the middle, this one, because it's been neglected for a long time, but actually it's coming back into restoration. So money's coming into this one. So new trees are being planted, which means some of the old trees are going to be replaced. Cherry trees or fruit trees are fantastic for biodiversity. Deadwood is fantastic for biodiversity. A bit of grazing can be a really good thing as well. So this is going in the right direction. This is, whilst it might look messy, we've got a great approach to managing it, where I actually, for my day job, which is nature isn't neat, and I think this is a great example of it. So this is some work. This was taken. When did I leave? 2014, 2012. I think I left the Wyre Forest. and this was taken when I was there. So a lot has moved on. So this should be looking even better now with those trees beginning to mature. And this is Unclis Farm. This is the orchard at Unclis in spring 2029, courtesy of John Isles' photo. You can see some of the big old cherry trees that were still hanging about, and lots of new planting in the same sort of row pattern as was from its original planting back in the early 1800s, I guess. And I thought I'd chuck in some nice pictures of flowers, because we look at trees a lot in the woodland, but there's lots of lovely wildflowers. And this is on the edge of one of the. This is sort of an edge habitat, sort of on the edge of woodland meadows. So you start to see things like wood anemones coming through. And so funding has been directed across the orchards and across the woodland to try and change the structure of the woodland. And so this is where I want to move away from the photos, and why, perhaps give you an idea of what Ruskin Land comprises and how it has changed over time. So the red boundary is Ruskin Land, or the land holding. The little funny little strip on the bottom left of the screen is a tiny little narrow verge along a forest ride that doesn't quite get out to the main road, doesn't quite reach Ruskin Land. It's a bit of an odd historical thing, but there we are. But the main body of Ruskin Land, which you see here, in the centre of the screen, you can see St George's Farm, which I'll show a picture of later. The different colour coding gives you an indication of what's there. So the kind of green area with the little tree icons is it's classed as wood pasture. I would argue it's grazed woodland. We won't get into the semantics of it, but it's trees with grazing. So it is largely not much in between, short grass, tall trees. The pinky bit with the fewer trees is an orchard. The slightly bit above with a more white area and the I suppose it's supposed to look like grass is grassland that has been treated to try and increase its species diversity. It was quite species poor, so it's what we call improved grassland. And we say improved when we're referring to agricultural grassland, so it's productive from producing fodder or forage for animals. So in this case, we're trying to unimprove it by reducing its fertility and increasing its wildflowers.
You can't get into it.
Oh, are you all right?
There's no sound.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have any sound on this
Sorry.
computer. We know that, don't we?
Oh dear.
Oh, no,
They can't hear us by the sound of it.
Okay.
I will carry on. If it's a problem,
yes.
Shout.
You carry on.
There's a funny little kind of tadpole looking thing in the middle, which is a little cottage. We call it, but it's a little bungalow where companions Paul and Lynn live, who are fantastic activists and environmental activists, growing wildflowers to sell, to encourage people to support pollinators. St George's Farm is the home of the Wyre Community Land Trust, and also, if you don't mind me saying, Richard and Kelly have recently moved into the farmhouse. And John and Linda Isles, who live in Unclis Farm, which is the kind of pink area in the bottom middle. And you can see where John and Linda live is meadow, mostly meadow and orchard. So that's what you would have seen largely around 12, 15 years ago. That's what you would have come across. And that is a leap ahead of what it perhaps was 20, 25 years ago, because there was some restoration work already beginning to take place. Over the last, And there we go. I've even got some nice rings. So Unclis Farm, St George's Farm, the bungalow. So here we go, Unclis Farm, a much older cottage with a Victorian extension, and you can see on the right-hand side Ruskin Studio, which was constructed with Wyre Forest oak, milled and produced on site. If you haven't been there, do come along at some point to one of our open days or events, because it's a great place to explore, and the facilities are excellent. This is St George's Farmhouse, and you can see there the orchard trees that were planted, must be about 10 years ago now, under environmental stewardship scheme, with the Dexter cows grazing in the orchard. And the bungalow, which has got this lovely green fencing around it, which isn't aesthetically fantastic, but it is protecting all of Paul and Lynn's wonderful wildflowers from deer, who like to sort of get into everything that they possibly can and eat all the nice stuff. So, from my perspective, managing the forest or understanding the challenges of the forest, we have these lovely creatures, we have disease, and we have climate change. They're all big challenges for us in terms of managing forest, but owning a woodland that is also designated for nature conservation. We have legal obligations, and we have all sorts of challenges in not only meeting those legal obligations, but in terms of just dealing with the sort of the environment in which we live. So we have an unbalanced ecosystem. We have deer grazing without any kind of natural checks and balances, e.g. wolves. Grey squirrel is obviously an invasive species. We have a very poor woodland diversity because of its past historic management. Now, the forest was an industrial woodland. It was really there to produce charcoal. So it was tended almost like an industrial agriculture. Today, it was an industrial woodland just producing oak charcoal for fuel for the West Midlands. And new and emerging pests and diseases. So as well as the sort of mammalian things, we have all sorts of fungi and bacterial problems, acute oak decline, sudden oak death, and who knows what else. And the tree on the right-hand side, you can see all the splits and damage and the bleeding canker in this tree. And this is a real problem for us in the Wyre Forest, as well, the Wyre Forest generally, as well as Ruskin Land. And then we have, if you are familiar with that barcode on the bottom, that's the temperature of years. That's our climate barcode, showing the increase in temperature over time. And it's not just temperature; it's wind and it's rain. Whether it's excessive rainfall or drought, high winds, and cold weathers, they all have an impact on these trees. They're living in an environment they're not adapted to. And ultimately, we have to do this as a guild under really quite significant financial constraints. We have old infrastructure. We have the value of the products that we can make or take from the forest, which are very difficult to get resources to look after this wonderful place. And it's also very hard. There are some fantastic, what I would call intangible returns. So some of the work the Wyre Community Land Trust do in terms of the communication, public engagement, mental health and well-being, all of those things that we don't get paid for, but actually the Ruskin Land in particular in the Wyre Forest really deliver in bucket loads. So this is a very simple little chart, and this is where I think this is where the the Ruskinian bit comes in. This is where I find the uniqueness of Ruskin Land beyond anywhere else I've worked. And I've worked all over the UK in all sorts of settings for the RSPB, the Wildlife Trust, local authorities, on national nature reserves beyond the Wyre Forest, in urban settings. And the Wyre Forest is unique, not just in this, we have charitable objectives, we have climate change and biodiversity crises, we have legal obligations of the asset management, but we have an environmental stewardship and education aspect, which some landowners won't have. Many of the wildlife trusts and such do. We have SSI management, which again is perhaps a little bit less, is also not uncommon. But there's a rural economy element which you see very rarely in a setting like this, where you have a piece of land which has to deliver against all of these different obligations, and that gives us a really unique opportunity, and particularly with the Guild and its beyond its environmental stewardship, its educational remit, to be an exemplar site, a site which we can, or an exemplar place, perhaps, but I don't, site's very technical, where we can not only, where we are doing so much more, and we can show others how much can be done and can be achieved on really quite, as I said, constrained resources. So this is the point where I want to sort of explore some of the Ruskinian bits that I've been reading. And this, when I was first introduced to the Guild, I didn't know anything about John Ruskin. I wasn't a very good schoolboy, and certainly literature and so forth wasn't high on my agenda. And so I came to it much later in life. And I suppose I'd like to ask a question, again, where we use the reaction this time again. Simon, if you don't mind giving me some feedback. The two parts, lecture 2, the unity of art, from where the hand, the head, and the heart comes from. Is anyone familiar with it? I'd like a heart if you're familiar with it. Hello, Simon.
There's a heart from Matthew. There's an explosive heart from Nicola. And Francis, yes.
Super. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to just stop sharing here for a minute, because the way this, maybe I can get, no, I can get away with it. I'm on two screens and I'm trying to work out how I can get my other notes up. I'd heard of this idea that fine art is that in which the hand, the head, and the heart of man go together. And I've always felt that that's true of so much more. And I thought that's very much true of Ruskin Land, because all of the people that are involved are very much hands-on, they're intelligent and they think, but they are passionate about the forest. And our association, the Guild's association with this piece of land, allows us to explore this much further. For those unfamiliar, Ruskin differentiated fine art from manufacture or art. And I'm going to read you just a little bit, if that's right, which is, manufacture is, according to the etymology and the right use of the word, the making of anything by hands, directly or indirectly, with or without the help of instruments or machines. anything proceeding from the hand of man is manufacture, but it must have proceeded from his hand only, acting mechanically and uninfluenced at the moment by direct intelligence. And I see that a lot at my work in how people operate machinery, undertake their work, and obviously they're not artists. They're not being expected to do anything else. But it's an interesting part of where I'm coming from. So he stated that art is the operation of the hand and the intelligence of man together. There is an art of making machinery, there is an art of building ships, an art of making carriages, and so on. All these properly called arts, but not fine arts. And he then states that fine arts are that in which the hand, the head, and the heart of man go together. And I'm going to read a bit more in a minute, if that's okay. And the reason I'm going to read it, I might put a caveat or an explanation around that, is that I was really inspired by the readings of Ruskin that have been done online. And if you haven't taken part in any of those or weren't aware of them, as Simon said, there are some recordings on the website of some of those readings. And I must admit, I do find reading Ruskin really difficult, and I've listened to this lecture as an audio file, and I found it much more. I was able to engage with it much more clearly. So when a bit further on, and this is why I want to read a bit more. The reason I want to read this is because so much of what Ruskin says here can be almost, from my experience of nature conservation and working with ecologists, whether they're botanists or entomologists or mycologists or whoever they might be, this resonated so much. And so Ruskin wrote, when Titian or Tintoret look at a human being, they see at a glance the whole of its nature, outside and in, all that has form of colour, of passion, or of thought, saintliness and loveliness, fleshy body and spiritual power, grace or strength or softness, or whatever other quality those men will see to the full, and so to paint. That, when narrower people come to look at what they have done, everyone may, if he chooses, find his own special pleasure in the work. The sensualist will find sensuality in Titian, the thinker will find thought, the saint the sanctity, the colorist colour, the anatomist form. And yet the picture will never be a popular one in the full sense, for none of these narrower people will find their special taste alone consulted, as that the qualities which would ensure their gratification shall be sifted or separated from the others. They are checked by the presence of the other qualities which they ensure gratification of other men. Thus Titian is not soft enough for the sensualist. Correggio suits him better. Titian is not defined enough for the formalist. Leonardo suits him better, and so on. And so this is in ecology. Sorry, these are my words now, obviously. And so this is in ecology. The entomologist will find that we could do better for insects. The mycologist will find more opportunities for fungi, and the same for the ornithologist, for birds, the botanist for flora. The list goes on, and often bringing it together, because in ecology, in land management, it so often requires skills beyond the individual. And so bringing all of those people together and finding that sort of compromise, finding that that sense of balance is a huge challenge and is so rarely achieved. And I've seen it go wrong so many times, where there's too much drive in one direction for one thing and we miss something else. And of course, in ecology, there is so much we yet still don't know. And how this is reflected in the forest is that there are drivers, really keen drivers, butterflies in particular, dormice, bats. So a lot of the forest management is driven in that direction. And so it is incumbent on us to avoid some of the bear traps of getting stuck down a particular theme or idea in ecology. And as Titian sees his subject, we hope to see the whole of the forest, not simply, and not simply in a nature conservation sense. This is about including the whole of it, including people. And this is where our relationship with the Wyre Community Land Trust, with the University of Birmingham, and all of those things, that's where they come together. And that's why I think this quote encapsulates the hand, the head, and the heart, really encapsulates Ruskin Land. And I think possibly more so here, the passion of the people that have been involved in the journey from when the Guild took the Wyre Forest, or the element of Ruskin Land, back from Natural England, because Natural England weren't doing a good enough job. And so that's where this sense of the hand, the head, and the heart, from my perspective, come from. I'd be really interested, as I say, I'm not a Ruskin scholar. I am not a I have a different perspective on things. I'd like to just pause here just for a minute, and I'd be interested to get a sense of whether anybody else has some thoughts on what I've just said, but also if there are anything else or any other passages or pieces of Ruskin's work which you could point me to that may help think about this, our area of our part of the Wyre Forest. Because for me, this is a real journey, a learning journey, and I'd like to share that with you, as I have done. I'd like you perhaps to give me give your thoughts on what I've done, how I'm interpreting it and what I might learn. So that's a big question for without a warm-up. I haven't given you a warm-up apart from some emojis. So has anyone got anything to say? First of all, what do you think about, how do you feel my interpretation of Ruskin's ideas? Oh, it's quiet.
It always takes a while.
Have I scared everybody off?
No.
I got very carried away into this talk. I got all excited about it, and now I haven't warmed you up sufficiently.
It always takes a while for someone to be brave and speak up first.
Nicola, I'm going to pick on you, Nicola, if that's okay, because you know this piece of work, and with your art background, and I like to be challenged, as you know, and it's always nice to have somebody who has a completely different perspective. So I'd be interested in your thoughts.
I don't see. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good, because I didn't seem to be able to unmute myself. There would be so many. I'm sure Francis would back me up on this. I mean, there would be so many potential passages in Ruskin that you could be pointed to, because one of the significant things about Ruskin, surely, that we'd agree about, is that he's highly contradictory and highly open to interpretation. And you can find in Ruskin, or I can find in Ruskin, something that supports and also demolishes anything I want to think or do or anything. So it's to say, well, go to this point, go to this quotation, go to that quotation, and so on. I think it's actually possibly a bad thing to do for somebody, in the sense that it's better that you read and you think about, well, does this fit something I am trying to think about at the moment? Does it fit something that I'm concerned about? Does it fit something that I want to raise and so on, which it may do on that day, and then, you know, a week later it won't. And that for me is one of the big attractions of Ruskin, actually, that you can get almost anything out of it. That isn't to say he doesn't have a view on things. He has so many views on so many things, and those views can alter an awful lot over time and over context. So it's not very helpful, Mark.
No, that's absolutely fine, Nicola. I'm not asking necessarily for an easy ride here.
No, we could send you screeds and screeds and screeds of possible quotations.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been very interesting, for example, when we've been looking for a reasonable strapline for each year's John Ruskin Prize.
Mm.
And coming up, funnily enough, with a quotation from Ruskin that actually answers what we want people to do is really difficult, because as soon as you put the quotation up, it's open to interpretation in almost any possible way. And that's not a negative thing at all, you know, because he was extraordinarily prescient. So he answered most of the issues that are concerning us now, or had a view on most of the issues that are concerning us now. So it's not very helpful, Mark, sorry.
That's absolutely fine, Nicola. It's helpful because you joined in. Has anyone else got anything to add?
Francis is bubbling up with something. I can see it.
You'll need to put your microphone on, Francis.
Francis, you're not muted, but we can't hear you. So there might be something on your settings that is not functioning. Can't hear you at the moment. No. While you're tackling that, I noticed, Judah, you unmuted. I wondered if you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Mark, for that presentation.
There's a lot more to come.
Thank you for that part of the presentation. And I suppose that there might be a slight missing component, which is, I think, if you're keen to apply some understanding or some, I don't know, a point that in this instance Ruskin is making about, I don't know, amplifying consumerism against amplifying something socially moral, then it probably feels like relevant to also bring in your understanding of horticulture, your understanding of growing, and see where those applications can like connect. So, for example, and this is probably going to be really lame because my understanding of like nature is pretty poor, but you know, one way of viewing this could be the forced way, maybe the pathway that seemed a little bit too aesthetic, could be kind of bringing in together plants that has, you know, a very kind of curated element to it. The other way could be around a much more natural, organic way, right? What I'm saying isn't that's not how you know, I think for one second that Ruskin was posing that, but I'm saying an interpretation of that to nature would be for you to think about what are things potentially that feel as if they are organic, they're growing, they can create some benefit, not just benefit necessarily to society, but benefit to the ecosystem. Please forgive me 1 second, there's someone's at my door.
That's okay. Has Francis got herself sorted? If not, we'll whiz on and we can pick up Francis later.
Francis has dropped out of the call, so is maybe rebooting.
Right, I will.
Oh, here she's coming. Here she's coming back. Hang on. Francis, welcome back.
Right, I've just switched over to my phone.
We can hear you, and we can hear
you
you
me now? I think it's my old computer.
Yeah.
I think that kind of accepting all the contradictory elements is part of how you can begin to try and work out what to do. So Ruskin's kind of multifarious approaches, I think, is how we probably have to bring Ruskin Land. There's so many things to work out what to do. We want to show Ruskin Land, but do we want too many people to trample over the wildflowers? So we have to somehow steer our way through all these different ideas. And I don't think it's easy.
No, it isn't. I'm going to talk a little bit about mosaics in a minute, which might not in an artistic way, but which might answer that a little bit.
And back to the sort of aesthetics and the art, the first photograph you showed of those lovely oak trees and the bluebells, all very lovely. What's one's response to it? One's first response is, well, aesthetically, it's really quite nice. But then you have to dig deeper into it and think, oh, but where's the biodiversity? And again, there are different approaches.
Yeah, and it's. I wanted to put those two pictures at the beginning because we do have preconceived ideas of what nature should look like, or could look like, or ought to look like because of capitalism, largely how we've been marketed things, and nature isn't often like that because, well, I go on and on about it, about green lawns and whatnot.
Mark, I'm noticing Chris Baines has got his hand up as well.
I've just wanted to make the obvious point, really, I suppose, that the idea of Ruskin Land, I think, and Ruskin's idea anyway of it, was that it should be a functional living landscape with people working in it, earning their livings. And so I think it's something very satisfying about the fact that the one business that is flourishing there is a small family business growing wildflowers in that landscape. You couldn't have anything more appropriate in a funny kind of way than actually using that environment as a protective landscape in which to grow wildflowers that can then spread nature elsewhere. And there aren't many kind of examples of that, I don't think, that are quite as clear as this. And the other kind of element of Ruskin Land, which I think is really interesting, is the biodiversity value of the crumbling orchards. There's a really nice overlap there between the productivity. I mean, those cherry orchards in their day were hugely productive, and are now revered for their beetle populations rather than for their cherry crops. And all of that, I think, is a really interesting aspect of that particular part of the Wyre Forest.
Yeah, it is. And Nicola, if it's okay, because I'm conscious of time, there's a few things I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the forest beyond the immediate things I've addressed, which is about how we're managing it now and how we're managing it going forward, to give you a sense of actually how we're trying to address the complexity of it and trying to see the forest as a whole, which I was sort of alluding to in that particular piece from Ruskin. So if it's okay, I'm just gonna. So let me know, Simon. Can you just give me a shout when that's back up?
Yep.
Super. Right, let's find my. Right. Something going on with here. Right. So I wanted to just briefly touch upon. So this is something a little bit out of kilter with this particular map. So this is a similar map to the one we saw earlier, which is pretty much what we would have seen, 15 or 20 years ago. And I wanted just to kind of give you a sense of how it's changed over time. And in that last 15 years, the forest has become a lot more diverse. So instead of it being a very even-aged sort of woodland with very little diversity, can you see my mouse pointer, Simon? Is that coming up on the screen down in the bottom right-hand sort of green area? Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
we can.
Yeah, okay. Right. So this area of what was woodland has been really thinned out and is partially grazed. So it's called, for the sake of administrative purpose, it's classed as wood pasture. You have this area of orchard here. You also have an orchard here, some farm fields here, some orchards here. There are other farms. This is right on the edge of the forest here. And then we've got some coppiced woodland. So if you're not familiar with the term, coppicing is where you cut the tree off when it's young, and instead of having one, stem, it has 2 or 3, and you cut it again, it has 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and it gradually, essentially, you're constantly creating a crop of poles, which can be anything up to, maybe 5 or 6 inches in diameter, depending on how often, how regularly you do it. And that's what the history of the forest, much of the forest was, in cutting these poles to create charcoal. So we've created some of these coppice, what we call coppice coops, around the forest. There's a funny little bit of kind of what we call heathland and mire over here, sort of damp and acidic and fewer trees. And then these lines that wiggle through, these arteries through the woodland, transport corridors, these are what we call rides. So they are woodland paths or tracks, which have then been opened out very wide. So the trees have been cut back away from them. So instead of having a kind of a very steep edge, where the edge of the path, you then have a very tall sort of dense forest immediately to your side. You have this much more softer edge. And these are really rich in terms of their ground flora and shrub flora. And they make great corridors for butterflies and insects and birds and various and so forth. And that's what was there maybe, up until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And gradually what we're doing now is we're starting to reduce the density of woodland in these sections here. So much fewer trees. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create kind of a corridor of to allow birds, insects, other wildlife into the forest by it being leaky. So instead of having much of the surrounding forest is kind of farm fields, so you've got flat grass and then a wall of trees. So what we're trying to do is to create this kind of leaky forest, which allows flora and fauna to migrate in and out of the forest. And this is why we call it a mosaic, because it's patchwork. It's lots of different height, age, vegetation structure. And gradually, as we go, we can get this forest to be super leaky, so things can move around very easily, very migrate. Because certain species, their populations can become very static, whether they're butterflies or mosses or fungi or birds. Well, not so much birds, they're much more migratory, but some species, particularly insects, might not travel more than 50 yards. And if they come across a barrier, they can't get past it. So we've got to create this ability to migrate, because if we lose a little pocket of those creatures or that particular plant, it can't be reintroduced. We can't get new populations migrate in from elsewhere. So this rich mosaic that's dynamic, it changes over time and space. This is the sort of habitat that we want to create. So it's really alive. Things can move around, regardless of whether they're the tiniest things, which with spores that will only travel a few meters, or something that's maybe go a few, maybe 100 yards, as well as all the larger, not quite megafauna, but certainly the larger, the birds and the mammals. And this is what makes it resilient. And then increasing the diversity of tree species through some of the from some tree planting to diversify away from the oak, and this will make the woodland much more resilient to climate change, because diversity of species, particularly trees, they benefit from a greater diversity, because a greater diversity of trees supports a greater diversity of fungi. And fungi, as we're increasingly learning, are the foragers for tree roots. They go out there and scavenge and find nutrients and provide resilience. So they're also, diversity of fungi also reduces opportunities for pathogenic fungi as well. So it really improves its sort of health and resilience. So understanding the forest, and the picture I've got here is of Ruskin Land, but I can assure you that we are working in close harmony with our neighbouring landowners, mostly Natural England in this case, who are doing very much the same thing across the forest. So we are part of this much bigger piece of work, seeing the forest as a whole, not as an individual landowner thinking about our individual things. And then I referred earlier to the fact that the Guild has this additional aspect, which is the rural economy. So in addition to managing for nature conservation, like, say, the Woodland Trust does in their little bit of the Wyre Forest, or the RSPB does in their bit of forest, we're also looking at harvesting timber. So there's an element of productive woodland within this, and the Wyre Community Land Trust are there, who are using some of that timber to produce wonderful things, from benches to boxes, and then as Chris mentioned, Lynn and Paul producing growing wildflowers. So there's these multiple elements thread through the management of the forest. And as you can see there, the sort of the linkages beyond Ruskin Land. And then we've got this other funny little thing, which is where this red arrow is, which is the avenue, which was, it's a really interesting, odd bit of history, this, which is a row of spruce trees, which I believe could be seen from Bowcastle House, which was where George Baker lived, who gave us the woodland in the first place. And it's beginning to die. It's sort of reached the end of its productivity. So avenues are really interesting from so many perspectives. The Victorians love them. They're in lots of parks, but they're really quite difficult to manage because all the trees are the same age, often the same species, and it's quite difficult to remove one or two as they are dying and replace them because of the competition of big mature trees either side. So they pose quite a significant problem. So here, I suppose they're also they're an example of man's power over nature, us dominating. I mean, it's very cathedral-like in this picture, but so they're have an interesting social, cultural meaning beyond simply an aesthetic ideal. So we want to retain an avenue here, and so our proposal is that this avenue will need to be felled, and so that we create a living classroom here with a linear arboretum where we can have a range of different tree species, which still provides us, whilst not quite the aesthetic of a 100% single species avenue of trees as this one is. It provides us with an avenue which is a nod to its history and its culture, but takes us to a more modern context of showing people different tree species and perhaps their timber value, their climate resilience, their importance for nature. So it's another aspect which we can bring into to our management and provide us with an additional educational resource, again, which is quite unusual in terms of managing in a nature conservation setting. And really, I'm just going to sort of wind up now with some pictures and a little bit of history, a few bits and pieces that go on here. You've got Alice, who was an apprentice with us, learning about conservation grazing many, many years ago, is now one of the managers for Natural England in the Wyre Forest. You've got Andy with his chainsaw gear on in the top middle, who was an apprentice with us, who's gone on to become a sort of a contractor. In the top right-hand side, we've got a picture of John Isles back in the day when I was still working there, with a group of people recovering from substance misuse, gaining a huge amount from just being in the forest, let alone actually doing something productive with their hands, producing something, is that beautiful, peaceful, fruitful bit of the forest management. And a nice picture of the Ruskin studio there, which, as I say, was built with forest oak. This is a picture from Studio in the Woods, a group of architect students coming and exploring different materials. Another example of some of the sort of unusual education work that goes on in the forest. Pictures kindly from Richard, who's on the call today, in Richard's workshop in St George's Farm, producing wonderful benches and, in this case, finger posts for, that says GWR, Richard, so I'm guessing that's for the Severn Railway from Bewdley or Kidderminster up to up the Wyre Valley. Still traditional crafts happening in the forest. You can see in the top right-hand corner people peeling bark, which the bark was used for tanning of leather, and the poles were used for all sorts of things. And on the left-hand side here, this is a lovely family who own a company called Coppice Creations, who still come out and coppice wood whilst with chainsaws, still a relatively traditional craft, and peel the bark and send it off for tanning of leather. And they make wonderful sort of garden furniture and traditional estate fencing and all sorts of bits and pieces. So the rural economy is still alive in the forest, which is wonderful to see. And as I said previously, this is done on an absolute shoestring with ageing infrastructure. So this is some of the outbuildings at St George's Farm, from which the Wyre Community Land Trust are based and are constantly seeking a bit of extra funding to improve, and well-deserved it is too. The timber yard, not looking at its best in winter. Sawmills, not sure. We've often discussed what Ruskin would have thought about some of this machinery in Ruskin Land, but we think we've got a good balance. And this is some of the wood that was milled in the forest some time ago, and an example of some of the creative things that some of this wood goes for. So on the right-hand side, this is part of the Studio in the Woods. This is one of the structures that they put in the woods, and there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. You can get inside of it and look through little holes and get different images of the forest and different vistas. It's a really fascinating structure. And yeah, finally, just a few pictures, because I don't think I did it justice with my maps and things. So I wanted to give you a little exploration of the forest. And that's, apart from me introducing a video in a minute, which you can find yourselves and explore yourselves, and now another time, I'm done. And I would be delighted to have any further questions or conversation. Francis, I cut you off earlier. Do you want to kick off? Oh, no, she's on silent.
Nicola had been going to make a point earlier.
Sorry, Nicola.
Yeah. I don't know if, Nicola, it's a point you still want to make. Anyone else with any questions for Mark or observations or?
I'll say something.
Go on then.
Excuse me if I was in and out of the. It's extremely hot here in Venice, so you'll have to excuse me if I sound a bit crazed. Hand, head, and heart. I'd love to do an exhibition called Hand, Head and Heart, but it's what I kind of think about before I start working most days, really. So for anyone who doesn't know what I do, I play around with cartography, and so especially this last series of works that I've been making to do with tracery, it helps me to think literally in a very practical way, because I'm using my hand to do the cutting in the map, and I try not to think too much, but I want to be reading a bit and looking more deeply in the map. And I like to think that my heart is in the right place so that I end up making something beautiful. So it may not connect with anything that you are talking about at all, but it was enough to make me want to follow this talk, put it that way.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I will actually try and find a map now with Ruskin Land on it and maybe make something.
Brilliant.
Great.
So
Keep us posted.
Can I pick on Richard? Because Richard lives and works in the forest. Is he still with us?
He is.
And he's also a craftsman.
And Kelly's with him too. Yeah.
Hello, Mark. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, hello. My thoughts with reflection of Hand, Head and Heart is, yeah, we here at the Wyre Community Land Trust, I think you summed it up with the words passion, Mark, in that it's very heartfelt that all the staff here are, you know, absolutely love Ruskin Land, and the fact that we are able to make a difference to other people's lives. So the big bit for us in our name is community. And on a personal note, you know, joining and living in Ruskin Land, Kelly and I are thoroughly enjoying being part of a new community here. But yeah, being able to go out each morning and use those three aspects that Ruskin considered is, yeah, I feel very privileged, I think. And it's great to be able to enable other people to achieve as well here at Ruskin Land. So all part and parcel of what we do.
Right. Thank you, Richard. I must admit, I agree. When I worked there, it was just, yeah, a fantastic place to be, and I haven't beaten it.
Yeah, no, it's great, and to be able to live and breathe it 24 hours is fantastic.
I just thought I'd say that I'm going to put into the chat a link to the monthly nature notes that Linda Isles writes. She writes them for a number of magazines. She sends them to a number of different magazines and publications and to us. And I don't speak to obviously all the points that Mark's been talking about today, but she is part of another couple who live on Ruskin Land, as Kelly and Richard do. They live at she and John live at Unkley's Farm, and she is another very close observer of the forest around her. So I'll just do that now. Well, if any of you have got any other questions, fire them at Mark.
Simon, can I ask a favour? I thought I had a link to the virtual tour, and I don't seem to see it in this slide, which is a bit frustrating. Are you able to have a quick search for it?
I will do that in just a second. Yes. Let me just put this link in for people. Yes, so if that's of interest, have a look. Have a look at that. Okay, just bear with me, and I'll see what I can find.
So just as an introduction, as well as all the stuff we talked about today, we have these wonderful educational partnerships beyond the forest. One particular one with Arts and Humanities at Birmingham University, and a lovely professor called John Holmes, who one of his PhD students was doing his PhD on forest depiction of the forest in fantasy fiction, and brought people out to the forest to read things like Tolkien in the forest environment. So you got the feel of the forest as well as the words. And as part of that, they produced a wonderful kind of virtual tour of Ruskin Land, which allows you to explore some of the different environments from different literary perspectives. And they're quite fun. And I would definitely recommend, if you can't, certainly if you, well, whether you can come and visit the forest or you visit the forest or not, they are worth an explore, because they do give this sort of alternative perspective. They're incredibly, production values are super. So really recommend.
So Mark, I've found it. So I'll just share my screen very briefly and just give people a taste.
Okay.
Here we go. So hoping has that appeared on people's screens. So this is the interactive map, and you can find this from the Ruskin Land pages of the Guild website. And it encourages you to start with number 1, which is the entry to it. And when you click on that, you may be able to see that there's a scanning image of that area, and then you can find out. So you can follow various things, and there are audio files and so on and so forth. Then you can go forward, you can jump forward, and then you're in the orchard. And I don't know if the sound is enabled, but on mine I can hear the insects, the sounds of the orchard. So that just gives you a little taster. I don't think we should spend time on this now, given the time. But what's wonderful about it is, as Mark was saying, is anyone from anywhere in the world can access this and can explore Ruskin Land and get a sense of the space. And you can zoom in, as I'm doing now. That's the beginning of it. So there's, or you click here and you get a different one, which is walking in the forest with John Ruskin. Slightly different. Journey begins here. Say into the woods. There's various information, things to read, different images. There's a little film there. Oh, no, there's an error on that one. Okay, we can't watch that now. But just to say, this is all on the By4 Educational Resource website. We link through to it on our website. So do have a look on the Guild's website pages for Ruskin Land, because oh, now I need to stop that because it's there you go. Okay, just gave a little taster. And yeah, Deirdre, totally up your street, a map. It's wonderful. So I'm conscious of time, so I want to suggest that unless anyone has something they particularly would like to ask or to throw into the ether for us all to think about, yes, anybody got anything else they'd like to say before we close things down and end the recording? Very aware of his time, Tuesday evening. I think we're probably, oh, Francis.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Just to say thank you, Mark. And I think Ruskin Land, I loved the fact that this is an exemplar, where I think art countryside, environment, climate all meet together in the middle of your sort of Venn diagrams, and we should be really proud of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. And can I say a formal thank you to you, Mark, also on behalf of all of us in the audience and the Guild. Just to reiterate what Francis just said, thank you so much for the time you've taken to share your thoughts. And I reflect that what I really loved was that your thoughts are ongoing and open-ended, which is exactly as Nicola was describing Ruskin in terms of changing his mind and thinking and searching on and always wondering, how he needed to press his thinking. And that, of course, is exactly what this living landscape is requiring of us as its custodians. And I think you've exhibited that, you've sort of demonstrated that in the way you described it and talked about it. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. And with that, I'm going to end the recording.
Thank you.